The chamber was enormous and filled with beings from across the galaxy. Jake Morrison stood near the back wall and watched through the thick glass as hundreds of alien delegates argued and gestured with appendages he could barely understand. Some had tentacles and others had wings, and a few looked like they were made of pure energy contained in glowing suits. The translation device in his ear worked overtime to convert the cacophony into something resembling human language, but even then, it was hard to follow every conversation at once. Beside him, Lisa, Chen crossed her arms and kept her face blank even though Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. They had spent 3 years working toward this moment and preparing humanity's case for membership in the Galactic Council. 3 years of diplomatic meetings and cultural exchanges and carefully worded proposals. 3 years that were about to come crashing down around them. Ambassador Krethal took the central podium, and his 4 eyes swept across the assembled delegates with obvious satisfaction. The Varaxian was tall and covered in dark blue scales that caught the light from the chamber's artificial suns. His voice boomed through the speakers, and the translation made it sound cold and final. "The vote is concluded," Krethal announced and paused for effect. "Humanity's petition for council membership has been rejected by a margin of 147 to 53. Furthermore, this council has determined that human vessels pose a significant risk to galactic stability. Effective immediately, all human spacecraft are banned from traveling beyond their home solar system. Any violation of this ban will be met with immediate seizure, and the offending crew will face trial under galactic law." The chamber erupted in a mixture of approval and scattered protests. Jake felt his stomach drop but kept his expression neutral. Lisa muttered something under her breath that the translator mercifully didn't pick up. "They're sealing us in," she said quietly, and only Jake could hear her over the noise. 3 decades of space exploration, and they're putting us in a box. Jake wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. Humanity had developed faster than light travel 30 years ago, without any help from the established galactic powers. It had been a moment of pure human ingenuity and determination. The first jump had taken them to Alpha Centauri, and from there they had spread cautiously outward and always aware they were newcomers to a very crowded galaxy. They had made contact with the Galactic Council 12 years ago, and the reception had been mixed at best. Some species welcomed humanity with curiosity and open arms. Others, like the Varaxians, saw them as dangerous upstarts who had developed too quickly and without proper guidance. The fact that humans had achieved FTL independently seemed to bother the Council more than it impressed them. It suggested that humanity didn't need their permission or their technology, and that made them unpredictable. Krethal continued speaking, and his tone grew more passionate as he listed humanity's supposed crimes. They were too emotional and too aggressive and too willing to bend the rules that had governed interstellar relations for thousands of years. They refused to accept the natural hierarchy of the galaxy, where older species guided younger ones. They asked too many questions and challenged too many traditions. "The humans have been in space for barely 3 decades, Krethal declared, and his scales rippled with emphasis. Yet in that time they have caused more disruptions than most species cause in their first 3 centuries. They ignore our protocols and pursue their own agenda, and show little respect for the wisdom of those who came before them. This council cannot in good conscience allow such a destabilizing force to roam freely through civilized space." Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Everything Krethal said was technically true, but stripped of all context. Yes, humanity had bent some rules, but only when those rules seemed arbitrary or harmful. Yes, they had challenged traditions, but only when those traditions prevented them from helping others or defending themselves. Yes, they were young by galactic standards, but that didn't make them stupid or reckless. The Tallene delegate raised a crystalline hand to speak, and her voice chimed like bells through the translation system. "While I acknowledge the concerns raised by the Varaxian delegation, I must note that humanity has also contributed significantly to several rescue operations and scientific endeavors. Their medical research has already benefited 17 different species. Perhaps a complete ban is premature." Krethal's 4 eyes fixed on the Tallene representative with obvious irritation. "Your species has always been too trusting. The humans may have done some good, but that does not change their fundamental nature. They are warriors first and diplomats second. Their entire history is written in blood and conflict. Do we really want to unleash that upon the galaxy? Our history is no more violent than most species," Jake said loudly, and his voice carried across the observation deck. He hadn't meant to speak, but the words came out anyway. Several alien delegates turned to look at the glass partition where the human delegation stood. Creethal's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. The human speaks. Tell me, Captain Morrison, do you deny that your species has fought countless wars? That you have nearly destroyed your own planet multiple times? That even now your governments cannot agree on basic principles of cooperation? Jake stepped closer to the glass, even though he knew Creethal couldn't hear him directly. We've made mistakes, he said, and kept his voice steady. Every species does. But we've also learned from them. We've built a unified world government, and we've reached for the stars, and we've done everything you've asked of us. And now you're locking us away because you're afraid of what we might become. Lisa touched his arm gently, and her voice was low. Jake, he can't hear you, and it wouldn't matter if he could. The vote is done. She was right, but Jake couldn't let it go. He had served in Earth's new space fleet for 15 years, and risen through the ranks and seen humanity's best and worst moments among the stars. He had watched human crews risk everything to save alien civilians from dying space stations. He had seen human scientists work alongside alien researchers to cure diseases. He had witnessed acts of courage and compassion that would make any species proud. But he had also seen the fear in alien eyes when they looked at humans. The way some species stepped back when a human entered the room. The whispered conversations that stopped when humans approached. The galaxy saw humanity's potential for violence and ignored everything else. Jake's communicator buzzed silently against his wrist, and he glanced down at the encrypted message. His breath caught in his throat. The message was brief and marked urgent. It was from Admiral Carter back on Earth, and it contained only a few words that changed everything. Endeavor crew missing in Kelrath sector. Last transmission indicated distress. Council authorities refusing assistance citing human ban. Awaiting orders. Jake looked at Lisa and saw his own shock reflected in her eyes. She had received the same message. The CSS Endeavor was an exploration vessel that had launched 3 months ago, and before the ban was even proposed. Captain Ryan Foster and his crew of 23 had been mapping systems in the outer reaches, and far from any established trade routes. They had been doing exactly what the Council claimed to support, and peaceful scientific exploration and cultural documentation, and now they were in trouble, and the Council was refusing to help because of a ban that had been announced less than an hour ago. Lisa's jaw tightened, and she looked from the message to the Council chamber where Thaw was still speaking, and his voice full of self-righteous certainty. They're going to let them die, she said softly. 23 people in the Council is going to let them die to make a point. Jake's mind raced through the possibilities. The Horizon was a diplomatic vessel, and not designed for combat or dangerous rescue operations, but it was fast and it had the range to reach the Kelrath sector. The sector was technically outside Council jurisdiction, and a buffer zone between civilized space and the unknown regions. No one was supposed to be there, which made it a perfect place for pirates or raiders or worse. We can't just leave them, Jake said, and his voice was quiet but firm. The ban means if we cross into that sector, we'll be violating galactic law, Lisa replied. They'll seize the ship and put us on trial and use it as proof that humans can't be trusted. And if we don't go, Ryan and his crew die alone in the dark. They stood in silence for a moment while the Council chamber continued its celebration below. Creethal had stepped down from the podium and was accepting congratulations from various delegates. The Varaxian delegation looked particularly pleased with themselves. Jake made his decision, and he knew it was the only decision he could make. He was human, and that meant something beyond politics or laws or diplomatic consequences. It meant you didn't abandon your own, and no matter what the cost. Get the crew ready, he told Lisa, and his voice carried the weight of command. We're going after them. Lisa nodded once, and there was no hesitation in her eyes. I'll have us ready to depart in 30 minutes, as they turned to leave the observation deck. Jake took one last look at the Council chamber and at all those alien species who had just decided humanity wasn't worth their time. The CSS Endeavor drifted through the void like a wounded animal, and its hull was scarred with plasma burns and puncture marks from weapons fire. Inside the darkened corridors, Ryan Foster moved carefully, and his magnetic boots clicking against the metal floor with each step. The ship's gravity generators had failed 2 days ago, and emergency power was the only thing keeping the life support systems running. Kelly Brooks worked at a damaged console in the engineering bay, and her fingers moved quickly across the cracked display screen. She had kept the ship alive through pure determination and creativity. but even she knew they were running out of time. The young engineer had jury-rigged half the systems on the ship and bypassed safety protocols that would make her instructors back on Earth cry. "How long do we have?" Ryan asked as he pulled himself into the engineering bay. Kelly didn't look up from her work, and her voice was tired but steady. "Life support will last another 48 hours if nothing else breaks. But we have bigger problems than that." Ryan knew what she meant, and he had been watching the sensor displays for the past 6 hours. 3 ships circled the Endeavor like sharks around a dying whale, and they stayed just outside weapons range and waited. The Velkari were patient hunters, and they had learned long ago that damaged prey eventually stopped moving. "They're waiting for us to die," said Paul Green from his position at the tactical station. The young officer had taken over after Lieutenant Commander Harris was killed in the first attack. 3 ships, and they're not even trying to finish us off. They want to pick through the wreckage when we're gone. Ryan felt the weight of command pressing down on him harder than it ever had before. He had started this mission with 23 crew members, and now only 11 remained. The first Velkari attack had come without warning when the Endeavor was conducting a standard survey of an uncharted system. The raiders had disabled their engines and boarded the ship, and what followed was a nightmare of close quarters, combat in narrow corridors. The crew had fought back with everything. They had, and humans might not have fancy energy weapons or advanced armor, but they were good at fighting in tight spaces. Ryan's security team had repelled the boarders, but the cost had been terrible. 12 people dead, and the ship crippled and stranded in a sector of space that wasn't supposed to have any hostile presence. "Did we ever get a response from the Council?" Ryan asked, even though he already knew the answer. Paul shook his head, and his expression was grim. "Nothing, and I've been broadcasting on every emergency frequency we have. Either they're not receiving us or they're choosing not to respond." Ryan suspected it was the latter, and he had heard rumors before they left Earth about growing anti-human sentiment in the Council. The Varaxians had been pushing for restrictions on human exploration, and apparently they had succeeded. The fact that the Endeavor was now trapped and dying in forbidden space with no help coming was probably exactly what species like the Varaxians wanted. "Captain?" Kelly called out, and her voice suddenly urgent. "I'm picking up a new signature, and it just dropped out of FTL. It's broadcasting human identification codes." Ryan's heart jumped in his chest, and he pushed himself over to the sensor console. The display showed a single vessel approaching their position, and the profile matched an Earth diplomatic ship. The horizon had come for them. "They actually came," Paul said, and there was disbelief in his voice. "They crossed into banned space to get us." But Ryan's relief turned to fear as he watched the tactical display update. The 3 Velkari ships had detected the newcomer, and all 3 were changing course. Their weapons were charging, and they were accelerating toward the horizon with clear hostile intent. "They're going to destroy her," Ryan said, and his voice was flat. "The Horizon is a diplomatic vessel, and she barely has any weapons. Those raiders will tear her apart before she can get close enough to beam us out." Kelly looked up from her console, and her face was pale. "What do we do?" Ryan stared at the tactical display and watched the Velkari ships closing on the horizon. He thought about Jake Morrison and the crew who had risked everything to come for them. He thought about his own people scattered throughout the damaged Endeavor and tired and wounded and waiting to die. He thought about all the reasons why what he was about to suggest was insane. Then he made his decision. "Kelly, how much power can you give me for the engines?" Ryan asked. The engineer's eyes widened as she understood what he was planning. "Maybe enough for 1 burn, and it won't be much, but it'll be everything we have left." "You want to ram them?" "The lead ship," Ryan confirmed. "If we hit them hard enough, it'll give the Horizon time to get close. Jake can beam our people out before the other 2 raiders recover." Paul turned in his seat, and his face was a mixture of shock and understanding. "Captain, that's a suicide run, and we won't survive the impact." "We're dead anyway," Ryan said simply. "At least this way we take one of them with us and give our rescuers a fighting chance." The engineering bay fell silent except for the hum of failing systems and the distant creaking of stressed metal. Ryan knew what he was asking, and he was asking his crew to die so that another crew might live. It went against every instinct he had as a captain, but there was no other choice. "All hands, this is the captain," Ryan announced over the ship-wide intercom. "I need everyone to get to the portside cargo bay immediately, and that's an order. Bring emergency supplies and med kits and anything else you can carry. We have 1 shot at getting off this ship alive, but it's going to be close." He didn't tell them about the ramming maneuver, and there was no point in giving them time to worry. Kelly understood and Paul understood, and that was enough. The crew began moving through the darkened corridors and helping wounded comrades and gathering what supplies they could. Ryan watched them on the internal monitors and felt pride mixed with grief. These people had followed him into unknown space and fought impossible odds and never once complained or gave up. They deserved better than to die in a sector that wasn't even supposed to exist. Engineering to bridge, Kelly's voice came through his communicator. I've diverted everything to the main engines and shields and weapons and life support, beyond the cargo bay. When you give the order, we'll have about 90 seconds of full thrust before the reactor goes critical. Understood, Ryan replied. Get down to the cargo bay with the others. With respect, sir, I'm staying at my station and someone needs to keep the engines running during the burn. Ryan wanted to argue, but he knew she was right, and he also knew that Kelly Brooks was as stubborn as they came. Thank you, Kelly. Don't thank me yet, Captain, and we still have to pull this off. Ryan moved to the helm controls and locked out all other stations. The Endeavor's bridge was dark except for the glow of his tactical display. Outside, the Velkari ships were closing on the horizon, and their weapons were almost in range. Jake was trying to maneuver away, but the diplomatic vessel was too slow and too lightly armed. All crew secured in cargo bay, Paul reported from below. We're ready when you are. Ryan's hands moved across the helm controls, and he had been a pilot before he was a captain, and his fingers remembered the old patterns. The Endeavor might be dying, but she still had one last fight in her. Kelly, give me everything, Ryan ordered. The ship shuddered as the engines roared to life, and power that should have been impossible flooded through damaged systems. The Endeavor surged forward and accelerated toward the lead Velkari raider at a speed that made the hull groan in protest. Alarms blared across every console, but Ryan ignored them, and his entire focus was on the targeting computer. The Velkari ship detected the movement too late, and it tried to turn, but the Endeavor was already committed. Ryan had lined up the approach perfectly, and the reinforced bow of the exploration vessel was designed to push through asteroid fields and handle impacts that would destroy other ships. Brace for impact, Ryan said calmly into his communicator. The Endeavor struck the Velkari raider like a hammer hitting glass, and the human ship's momentum and mass overwhelmed the raider's shields in an instant. Metal screamed and tore, and the two vessels became a twisted mass of wreckage tumbling through space. Secondary explosions rippled through both hulls as power systems overloaded and atmosphere vented into the void. Felt the impact throw him against his restraints, and the world became a chaos of sound and pain and flashing lights. The bridge crumpled around him, and consoles exploded in showers of sparks. He tried to reach for his communicator, but his arm wouldn't respond, and something warm ran down his face. Through the fading display screens, he saw the horizon moving in fast, and its transport systems were already locking onto the cargo bay where his crew waited. 11 souls vanishing in columns of light and pulled to safety in the final seconds before the Endeavor tore itself apart completely. Ryan smiled as the darkness closed in, and he had done his job and his people were safe, and sometimes that was all a captain could ask for. The last thing he heard was Kelly's voice over the failing communicator saying something he couldn't quite make out. And then there was only silence and the cold embrace of space. The Horizon's bridge erupted in controlled chaos as Jake Morrison watched the Endeavor accelerate toward the lead Velkari ship, and he knew immediately what Ryan Foster was planning. The exploration vessel was turning itself into a missile and trading its own destruction for a chance to save everyone aboard. Shields to maximum, Jake ordered, and his voice was steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Lisa, get me a transport lock on every human life sign aboard that ship. Lisa Chen's fingers flew across her console, and her face was tight with concentration. There's too much interference from the Velkari. Jamming, and I need to get within 500 meters for a clean lock. That puts us right in their firing range, said Chris Palmer from the navigation station. We'll be a sitting target. Jake watched the tactical display as the Endeavor closed the distance to the lead raider, and he could imagine Ryan at the helm with his hands steady on the controls and making the hardest choice a captain could make. Then we better make it count and get ready to move fast. The impact when it came was spectacular and terrible. The Endeavor's reinforced bow punched through the Velkari shields like they weren't even there, and the two ships became a tumbling mass of debris and escaping atmosphere. Explosions rippled through both hulls, and secondary detonations lit up the darkness like a string of deadly fireworks. Now, Jake shouted. Get them now. The horizon surged forward and its engines straining as it closed the distance to the dying Endeavor. The remaining two Velkari ships hesitated for just a moment and shocked by the sudden destruction of their companion, and that moment was all Lisa needed. Her console lit up with transport locks, and one by one the Endeavor crew materialized in the horizon's cargo bay. 10 people appeared in columns of light, and some were injured, and all were exhausted. Medical teams rushed forward with stretchers and emergency supplies, and the cargo bay became organized chaos as they triaged the wounded. "Where's Foster?" Jake demanded over the comm. "Still on the bridge," Lisa replied, and her voice was strained. "His life signs are weak and I'm trying to get a lock, but there's too much interference from the explosions." Jake made a decision and he grabbed an emergency transport beacon from the equipment locker. "Beam me over and I'll attach this to him manually." "Captain, that ship is coming apart," Chris protested. "You'll have maybe 30 seconds before the reactor goes critical. Then you better be quick on the recall," Jake said, and stepped onto the transport pad. The world dissolved into light and energy, and Jake felt the familiar sensation of his atoms being scattered and reassembled. When reality snapped back into focus, he was standing on the Endeavor's ruined bridge, and the deck was tilted at a crazy angle, and sparks rained from ruptured conduits. Ryan Foster was slumped over the helm. Controls and his suit was breached in several places, and blood floated in small globules. In the zero gravity, Jake pushed himself across the bridge and attached the transport beacon to Ryan's chest. "Got him, and get us out." The transport engaged, and Jake felt relief flood through him as the bridge disappeared and they materialized back on the horizon. Medical teams immediately swarmed Ryan, in their hands moving with practiced efficiency, as they sealed his suit breaches and stabilized his injuries. "He's alive but barely," one of the medics reported. "He needs surgery now." "Take him to medical," Jake ordered, and then turned back to the main view screen. The two remaining Velkari ships had recovered from their shock and were now closing fast on the horizon. Their weapons were charging, and Jake could see the targeting locks appearing on his tactical display. "They're not happy," Chris said with remarkable understatement. Jake studied the tactical situation, and his mind racing through options. The horizon was designed for diplomacy and not combat, and its shields could maybe take 1 or 2 hits before failing. Its weapons were minimal, and barely enough to discourage pirates, and certainly not enough to fight 2 full-sized raiders. Running was the obvious choice, but the Velkari ships were faster and more maneuverable. "We can't outrun them," Lisa confirmed, as if reading his thoughts. "They'll catch us in less than 2 minutes. Jake looked at the debris field spreading out from the destroyed ships, and an idea formed in his mind. It was risky and probably insane, but they didn't have many options. "Then we don't run and we make them chase us through that debris field." "Captain, the field is unstable," Chris said, and his voice rose slightly. "One wrong move and we'll be torn apart. The Velkari ships are bigger than us, and they'll have an even harder time navigating it, and we're going to use that against them," Jake replied. "Plot a course straight through the densest part of the field and make it as twisting as you can." Chris hesitated for only a moment, then his hands moved across the navigation controls. "Course plotted, and it's going to be rough. Lisa, deploy our torpedoes, but don't target the raiders directly," Jake continued. "I want you to hit the larger pieces of debris and create secondary explosions and chain reactions, and anything that makes the field even more chaotic." Understanding dawned on Lisa's face. "We're going to turn the debris into a minefield." "Exactly, and Kelly, get down here," Jake called to the engineer who had come over with the Endeavor survivors. "I need you on defensive systems." Kelly Brooks appeared on the bridge moments later, and she looked exhausted, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She took one look at the tactical display and nodded. "You want me to maximize our shield efficiency and redirect power from non-essential systems." "Can you do it?" Jake asked. "Watch me," Kelly replied, and slid into the defensive station. The horizon plunged into the debris field, and Chris's hands moved constantly across the controls as he guided the ship through the maze of spinning wreckage. Chunks of hull plating tumbled past the view screen, and some were small and others were the size of shuttlecraft. The ship shuddered as smaller pieces bounced off the shields, and alarms chimed constantly from the damage control station. Behind them, the 2 Velkari raiders followed, and their larger size making navigation more difficult. They had to slow down and take wider turns and constantly adjust their course to avoid the bigger pieces of debris. "First torpedo away," Lisa announced, and the weapon streaked into the debris field and detonated against a section of the Endeavor's engine housing. The explosion sent a wave of smaller debris spreading outward like shrapnel. The trailing Valkyrie ship took multiple hits to its shields and was forced to veer off course. It clipped a spinning piece of superstructure and its shields flickered and weakened. Lisa launched another torpedo, and this one hit a compressed fuel tank from one of the destroyed ships, and the resulting explosion was massive and blinding. "Direct hit on Raider 2, Chris reported. "Their shields are down and they're venting atmosphere and breaking off pursuit." That left one Valkyrie ship, and it was more cautious now and hanging back and trying to target the horizon with long-range weapons. Energy beams lanced through the debris field, but the constantly shifting wreckage made accurate targeting nearly impossible. "They're being smart," Jake observed. "They're going to wait for us to clear the field, then nail us in open space." Kelly looked up from her console and her expression was thoughtful. "Captain, I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." "I'm listening," Jake said. "I can overload our shield generators and create a massive electromagnetic pulse, and it won't destroy their ship, but it'll blind their sensors and scramble their targeting systems long enough for us to jump to." "TL, what's the catch?" Jake asked, even though he suspected he knew. "The catch is that our shields will be completely offline for about 10 minutes. After the pulse, and if anything goes wrong with the FTL jump, we'll be sitting ducks, and we also might fry half our own systems in the process." Jake looked at the tactical display and weighed their options. They could keep dodging through the debris field, but eventually they would make a mistake or run out of room. They could try to fight, but the horizon simply didn't have the firepower. Or they could take Kelly's gamble and hope that 10 minutes was enough time to get the FTL drive charged and make the jump to safety. "Do it," Jake decided. "Chris, start charging the FTL drive now, and Lisa, once that pulse goes off, I want you to launch every remaining torpedo we have and spread them out in a wide pattern, and maybe we'll get lucky and hit something." The crew moved with practiced efficiency, and each of them knowing their role and trusting their captain's judgment. The horizon cleared the edge of the debris field, and open space stretched before them. The Valkyrie Raider accelerated and its weapons charging for a killing shot. "Pulse in 3 seconds, Kelly announced. 2 and 1 and firing." The shield generators overloaded in a carefully controlled cascade and released their stored energy in a single massive burst. The electromagnetic pulse radiated outward like an invisible wave and washed over the Valkyrie ship. Its sensors went dark and its targeting computers crashed, and its weapon systems cycled offline as the pulse overwhelmed their systems. "Torpedoes away," Lisa called out, and launched their remaining weapons in a spread pattern. Ambassador Krathal was enjoying a celebratory dinner with several key council members when his personal communicator buzzed with an urgent alert. He excused himself from the table and stepped into a private alcove to read the message, and his 4 eyes scanning the text with growing interest. The Galactic Security Forces had intercepted a human vessel violating the newly imposed ban, and the ship in question was the Horizon, and the same diplomatic vessel that had witnessed the vote earlier that day. "Perfect," Krathal muttered to himself, and his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. This was exactly what he needed to prove his point about human lawlessness, and the fact that they had violated the ban within hours of its announcement would make his case even stronger. He sent a quick reply ordering that the ship be brought before the council the following day, and then returned to his dinner with renewed enthusiasm. The next morning, the council chamber was packed with delegates from across the galaxy, and news of the human violation had spread quickly through the diplomatic channels. Some species, like the Varaxians, came to witness what they saw as inevitable punishment. Others, like the more moderate Talene Collective, attended with expressions of concern and uncertain about what this incident might mean for future human relations. Jake Morrison stood in the center of the vast chamber and flanked by Lisa Chen on his left and Ryan Foster on his right. The captain of the Endeavor looked pale and moved stiffly from his injuries, but he had insisted on being present despite the medical team's protests. The 3 humans stood alone in the spotlight, while hundreds of alien eyes watched from the surrounding tiers. The atmosphere in the chamber was hostile, and Jake could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on them from all sides. He had known this moment would come from the instant he ordered the Horizon to violate the ban, but knowing something, intellectually, and experiencing it emotionally, were very different things. Krathal took his position at the central podium, and his scales gleaming under the artificial lights. Captain Morrison, you stand accused of willfully violating the territorial ban imposed on humanity by this council, and you entered the Kelrath sector without authorization and engaged in military action against vessels within that sector, and how do you plead to these charges? Jake met the Varaxian's four-eyed gaze without flinching. Guilty, and we violated your ban. A murmur ran through the chamber like a wave, and many delegates had expected the humans to make excuses or try to justify their actions. But this direct admission caught them off guard. Krethal's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile, and clearly this was going better than he had hoped. The human admits his guilt, Krethal announced to the chamber. This proves exactly what I warned you about. And humans cannot be trusted to follow even the most basic rules of galactic society, and they are a danger to us all. However, Jake said loudly, and his voice cutting through the murmurs, and before you pass judgment, there is something you need to see, and something that explains why we did what we did. Krethal's expression darkened. There is no explanation that justifies breaking council law. Then let the council decide that after they see the evidence, Jake replied and gestured to Lisa. Lisa activated the holographic projector she had been carrying, and the chamber's lights dimmed automatically. Suddenly, the air above the chamber floor filled with a three-dimensional recording and the footage taken from the Horizon's external cameras during their rescue mission. The assembled delegates watched in silence as the scene played out before them. The damaged Endeavor drifted in the black of space, and its hull scarred and broken. 3 ships circled the dying vessel like predators, and their profiles were unmistakable to anyone familiar with galactic species. The ships were Velkari raiders, and their distinctive angular hulls and weapons arrays were clear in the recording. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and the Velkari were supposed to be contained within their home system and part of a peace agreement signed 2 centuries ago after they had terrorized multiple sectors of the galaxy. What were they doing in the Kelrath sector and so far from their designated territory? The footage continued and showed the Horizon's arrival and the Velkari ships immediately turning to attack the newcomer. Then came the moment when the Endeavor accelerated toward the lead raider, and the desperate sacrifice that gave the Horizon time to rescue the crew. The chamber watched in stunned silence as the 2 ships collided, and the resulting explosion lighting up the darkness. The recording showed the battle that followed and the Horizon's desperate flight through the debris field and the electromagnetic pulse that disabled the pursuing raider, and finally the jump to faster-than-light travel. When the footage ended, the hologram faded and the lights in the chamber slowly returned to normal. The silence that followed was profound, and no one seemed willing to be the first to speak. Jake let the moment stretch, and giving the delegates time to process what they had just witnessed. The Kelrath sector is not empty, Jake said quietly, and his voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. The Velkari have been using it as a base for raiding operations, and they have been there for years, and I suspect some of you already knew this. More uncomfortable shifting, and several delegations exchanged glances, and a few species who had mining or trade interest near the Kelrath sector suddenly found the floor very interesting. My crew was attacked without provocation while conducting a peaceful scientific mission, Jake continued. When we called for help, we were told that as humans, we were not entitled to Galactic Council protection, and so we went ourselves because that is what humans do, and we do not abandon our own. Jake began walking slowly around the chamber floor and making eye contact with as many delegates as he could. We found our people, and we fought 3 warships with 1 diplomatic vessel and 1 dying exploration ship, and we lost good men and women in the process, and we did not ask for your permission because we knew you would not give it. This is beside the point, Krethal interjected, and his voice sharp. The ban exists because humans are dangerous, and this incident proves it, and you engaged in military combat. Dangerous, Ryan Foster spoke up, and his voice rough from his injuries. We were mapping star systems and documenting new worlds, and the Velkari attacked us without warning and killed 12 of my crew, and you want to talk about how humans are dangerous. The Talene representative sovereign rose from her seat, and her crystalline form catching the light. I move that we review the evidence presented here and launch a full investigation into the Velkari presence in the Kelrath sector, and if they have indeed violated the containment treaty. This is a matter of galactic security that supersedes the human ban, Second that motion, said the Gentari delegate, and a species known for their strict adherence to law and order. The footage clearly shows Velkari vessels operating in territory they are forbidden to enter, and if this treaty violation has been occurring for years, as Captain Morrison suggests, then we have a serious problem. Krathal's scales rippled with agitation. This is clearly a transparent attempt to distract from the human violation of council law. Is it? Sovereign asked, and her voice taking on a sharp edge. Tell me, Ambassador Krathal, did your people know about the Velkari presence in the Kelrath sector? The Phoraxian ambassador did not answer immediately, and that pause spoke volumes to the experienced diplomats in the chamber. The silence stretched for several long seconds and became more damning with each passing moment. The Varaxian Empire has extensive mining interests in systems adjacent to the Kelrath sector. Sovereign continued, in her tone suggesting she had suspected this for some time. Your patrol ships regularly traverse that region, and I find it difficult to believe you never encountered any Velkari raiders, and unless, of course, you had some sort of arrangement with them. The accusation hung in the air like poison, and if it was true, then the implications were staggering. The Varaxians might have been tolerating or even enabling Velkari raiders in exchange for keeping other species away from their mining operations. It would be a massive scandal, and one that could reshape the power dynamics of the entire council. Jake decided to press the advantage while he had it. We have additional evidence and weeks of sensor logs from the Endeavor before it was attacked, and data showing regular Velkari traffic patterns in the Kelrath sector and movement patterns that suggest permanent bases, and not just occasional raiding parties. And we are willing to share all of this data with an independent investigation. This is blackmail, Krathal hissed, and his composure finally cracking. No, Jake replied calmly. This is transparency, and something that seems to be lacking in this council, and you voted to ban humanity and claimed we were too dangerous and too unpredictable. But what we have shown you today is that we are loyal to our own, and we fight to protect the innocent, and we do not make secret deals with pirates and raiders. The chamber erupted in debate, and delegates arguing among themselves and with each other. The moderate species who had been pressured into supporting the human ban now saw an opportunity to push back against Varaxian dominance. The revelation about the Velkari gave them the political cover they needed to change their positions. The corridors outside the council chamber buzzed with activity as delegates dispersed in small groups, and their conversations animated and urgent. Jake Morrison walked beside Lisa Chen and Ryan Foster, and the three of them moving slowly to accommodate Ryan's injuries. They could feel the eyes of other species following them, and the weight of those stares very different from the dismissive glances they had received just days before. Sovereign caught up with them near the main exit, and her crystalline form refracting the corridor, lights into rainbow patterns. That was quite a performance, Captain Morrison, she said, and her voice carrying the musical quality common to her species. It was the truth, Jake replied, and kept his tone neutral. Perhaps, Sovereign acknowledged, but you also knew exactly what you were doing, and you knew how to play the political game and turn the Council's own rules against them. And humans have only been in space for 3 decades, yet you already understand power dynamics better than species who have been here for millennia. Jake stopped walking and turned to face the Talene representative directly. We have had plenty of practice on Earth, and human history is full of political maneuvering and conflicts and alliances, and we have made every mistake possible and learned from most of them. That is what concerns some of us, Sovereign said, and her tone became more serious. You learn very quickly, and you adapt, and you do not accept the established order just because it has always been that way, and change is difficult for many species in the Council, and they prefer stability over justice. And which do you prefer? Lisa asked. Sovereign was quiet for a moment and seemed to consider the question carefully. I prefer survival, and the galaxy is changing whether the Council wants to acknowledge it or not. And new powers are rising and old. Alliances are fracturing, and in times like these, those who cling too tightly to the past often find themselves swept away by the future. A word of warning, then, Ryan said, and his voice still weak but determined. The Varaxians will not forgive what happened today, and Krathal looked like he wanted to tear us apart with his bare claws. I am aware, Sovereign replied. You have made powerful enemies today, and the Varaxian Empire has long memories and significant resources, and they will find ways to strike back at humanity, and perhaps not directly but through proxies and economic pressure and political maneuvering. We will be ready, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. Sovereign's expression was unreadable, but her tone carried something that might have been respect or perhaps concern. I believe you will be, and that is what makes your species so interesting and so dangerous, and you do not simply react to threats, and you anticipate them and prepare for them and strike first when necessary. She turned to leave, then paused. The investigation into the Kelrath sector will take months and perhaps years, and there will be resistance from those who benefit from keeping that region unstable. And watch your backs, Captain, and the path ahead will not be easy. After she left, the three humans continued toward their docking bay in silence, and each lost in their own thoughts. The victory in the council chamber felt hollow somehow, and Jake knew that Sovereign was right and they had bought themselves time, but the real battle was just beginning. Back on Earth, the footage from the Kelrath sector had already been released to the public and transmitted to every human colony and outpost in the solar system. The images spread rapidly through news networks and social media and communication channels, and within hours, billions of people had seen the Endeavor's sacrifice and the Horizon's desperate rescue mission. The response was immediate and overwhelming, and recruitment offices for Earth's space forces found themselves flooded with applications. Young people who had been uncertain about military service now lined up eager to join. Defense budgets that had been stalled in various national governments suddenly passed with near unanimous support. Public opinion shifted dramatically in favor of expanding humanity's presence in space and preparing for potential conflicts. Political leaders who had advocated for a cautious approach to galactic relations found themselves on the defensive. The footage had made something crystal clear to the human population, and the galaxy was not a safe place, and the Galactic Council could not be relied upon for protection. If humans wanted to survive among the stars, they would need to be strong enough to defend themselves. Admiral Carter called Jake directly once the Horizon returned to Earth orbit. The old military commander's face on the view screen looked tired but determined. You have started something, Captain, and something that cannot be stopped now. I know, sir, Jake replied. We did what we had to do. I am not criticizing you, Carter said. You saved lives and exposed corruption and bought us breathing room with the Council. But you also showed the entire human race what we are up against, and now they want action, and they want protection, and they want revenge for what happened to the Endeavor crew. What are your orders, sir? Jake asked. Carter leaned back in his chair. Continue your mission and keep exploring and keep mapping. But do it armed and do it ready, and every human ship that leaves the solar system from now on will have proper weapons and shields and combat training, and the age of peaceful exploration is over, Captain, and we are moving into something else. The conversation ended, and Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle even more heavily on his shoulders. They had wanted to show the galaxy that humans could be trusted, and that they deserved a place among the civilized species. Instead, they had proven that humans were dangerous when threatened, and that they would not hesitate to fight for their own. In the weeks that followed, the political landscape shifted rapidly. The Galactic Council launched its investigation into the Kelrath sector, and teams of inspectors descended on the region and began documenting the Velkari presence. What they found was worse than anyone had expected, and dozens of permanent bases and evidence of raids on multiple species, and trade routes and communication logs that implicated several council members in covering up the situation. Krethal was removed from his position as Varaxian ambassador, and his government forced to issue formal apologies to numerous species who had lost ships and people to Velkari raiders. The Varaxian Empire's influence in the council declined sharply, and moderate voices gained power for the first time in decades. The human ban was officially lifted 6 months later, and though certain restrictions remained on where human vessels could travel, more importantly, humanity was granted observer status in the council and a step toward eventual full membership. It was not everything humans had wanted, but it was progress. Jake stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned CSS Defender and watched Earth rotate slowly below. The ship was one of 12 new exploration vessels being built, and each one heavily armed and designed for long-range missions into unknown space. The Defender would be his new command and its mission to continue the work that Ryan Foster had started. Ryan himself had recovered from his injuries and been promoted to admiral, and now he oversaw the training programs for the expanding space forces. The survivors of the Endeavor had become heroes on Earth in their story, told and retold and inspiring a new generation to reach for the stars. Kelly Brooks had joined Jake's crew as chief engineer, and she had already made improvements to the Defenders, systems that had the design team back on Earth scrambling to keep up. Lisa Chen remained his first officer, and her calm competence during the crisis had earned her numerous commendations and offers of her own command. "What are you thinking about?" Lisa asked as she joined him on the observation deck. "About how much has changed in 6 months," Jake replied. "About how we went from being banned from the galaxy to being preparing for war." "Not war necessarily," Lisa said. "Defense and exploration and making sure what happened to the Endeavor never happens again." "Is there a difference?" Jake wondered aloud. Lisa considered the question. "Maybe not, and maybe that is what being human means, and we hope for peace, but we prepare for conflict, and we trust, but we verify, and we extend the hand of friendship while keeping our guard up." Jake smiled slightly. "When did you become a philosopher?" "Somewhere between getting shot at by pirates and testifying before an alien council," Lisa replied with a matching smile. Far across the galaxy, other species watched humanity's military buildup with a mixture of concern and interest. Some saw it as proof that the ban should never have been lifted and that humans were indeed dangerous. Others recognized it as the natural response of a species that had been threatened and abandoned by those who claimed to represent galactic civilization. The Velkari were eventually driven from the Kelrath sector after a joint military operation involving multiple council species. The battles were brutal, and the raiders fought desperately to maintain their territory, but they were eventually contained once again within their home system. Human forces participated in the operation, and their ships and crews proving themselves capable and reliable and earning grudging respect from species who had previously dismissed them. Years later, when historians looked back on this period, they would identify it as the turning point in human-galactic relations.